Welcome to Feature Please, a hateful voyage through the Delta Quadrant. My name is Joseph.
I'm your co-host, Peter.
Peter, we have finally done what every podcast seems to do eventually.
Sell out to some sort of mattress commercial.
Well, close. We decided to start a Patreon because Peter and I do this entirely as a hobby. We're really only turning to crowdfunding to cover kind of basic bills and that we actually incur to present the show, and also maybe eventually justify it to our wives that it would be okay for us to spend money on better equipment.
I have hidden the cost of this podcast from my wife in its entirety, so
hey Casey, hope you're not listening to this one.
I guarantee you she's not.
Okay, that's good. We thought, we've done 64 episodes of this. Maybe it's time for us to see if folks willing to kick in a couple bucks. And if you are, go to www.patreon.com/VeedYourPlease. That'll be on our social media pages as well. Whatever you feel like the show is worth to you, if anything, go ahead. If it's just not something you can do, no big deal. We're going to keep trucking along, but a few bucks will defray the cost of our hosting and the software we use to be able to actually do it, even though we're in remote locations.
If, while determining the value to you of the podcast, you are still haunted by the terrible slash fiction that Joe inflicted upon everybody a few episodes back, you can go ahead and hit him up at veedyourplease@gmail.com and ask him for reparations directly.
You're lucky, Peter. I was tempted to put in a perk level that if you donated a high enough level, I would ambush you with dramatic readings of different fanfic that Stevie found. But I decided, you know what? We'll just limit it to.
We'll not play with fire.
We'll just load up our deleted scenes.
Ooh, that might be even more dangerous.
Well, I mean, there's a couple that I think maybe have been too hot for TV or just kind of rambled on too far on something that wasn't connected to Trek. That, if you're a fan of the show, it's probably something you would appreciate. So, I have one clip in mind when we did Deadlock and we went a little too deep in our Janeway making out with herself rabbit hole. And so, stuff like that. If that sort of thing is like, yes, I would like that content. All right. Well, Patreon will be the place you can get it.
We'll call that the blackmail perk.
There you go. Hey, really stockpile your information.
So, you'd mentioned a little earlier about a Feed Your Please trauma support group post that I made regarding a few episodes back. The massive amounts of overlap that I've come to discover between Voyager and Better Call Saul. And there's a few episodes. There's not a lot of TV that I watch out there. Yeah, really, we're adults. I have a kid, and if I'm not watching Wiggles or Blippi, if you don't know what these words mean, good on you. You're living the good life. Keep doing
living
that.
Living the dream.
Mm-hmm. She runs the TV, and if it's not one of her things, there's a fit. So there's not a lot of adult programming anymore. But the few I can hang on to, again, Better Call Saul, Sunny in Philly, Chernobyl was really good. I, again, highly recommend that. Of course, Voyager, which I've become more bold in watching that while she's there and letting her just scribble all over the notes I'm taking, because some of these episodes, that becomes more entertaining than what I'm actually watching on TV. But it's crazy looking back 20 some years ago and seeing where some of these actors were at that would later go on to star in their own shows. And man, the Better Call Saul overlap went a lot deeper than we had given initial credit to. Obviously, we know everybody's favorite space prison clown turned out to be Chuck McGill, aka Mike McKean. Mm-hmm. And even old Snarf, Neelix, Ethan Phillips, was featured as a judge, one of the Albuquerque judges. And the big revelation out of Favorite Son from the Booby Trap was Howard Hamlin, Patrick Fabian, as what you referred to as Space Chad. I think his name was what, Tamarin?
Yes.
But there were two other pretty big discoveries I made while mucking around in IMDb.
The first one that you found is the one that blew my mind. But go ahead. Go ahead and share it.
One of the most famous that guys out there, Ed Begley Jr., who I had given primary credit as Stan Sitwell from Arrested Development. And he was, of course, the evil Bill Gates, aka Henry Starling of ChronoWorks, and that's with an X because it's the 90s in Extreme. You may remember him as the person who tried to kill Sarah Silverman and sadly did not succeed. He'd also be the same guy who wanted to just help everybody get iPods and faster computers today to help humanity, even though it was going to, destroy the universe a few hundred years later.
If that meant potentially disrupting all of space and time, then by God, that improvement to the App Store is worth it. I think we can both agree.
Absolutely. But his role in Better Call Saul was a straight-laced lawyer who ran a pretty fancy firm that gave Jimmy, Saul Good, his first real position as a lawyer. But then the crazy one came, Joe. And I can't even pronounce this guy's Raphael Barge. What's the right way to do that?
I'm not quite sure, but we know him as the victim of Snarf Snarf himself, crewman Jonas, who was dumped into space hell.
Crewman Jonas had a very interesting, I think, and looking back, tying this all back into Voyager, I think that Jonas had one of the coolest story arcs that we've seen on Voyager because there were real consequences. There was some real meat on the bone of what he got to do. And he was in a lot of episodes, mostly around season 2?
Yeah. He kind of came onto the scene earlier than that, if I recall correctly. And I'm trying to remember if he actually showed up in the background in season 1 or if he really just showed up in season 2.
He was there in season 1, but he started getting some meaty stuff.
Yeah, he got meaty. He got meaty speaking parts starting in season 2 as Seska's secret pal on the ship.
He was also part of some of the earlier talks of Maquis mutiny when there was a stupid episode the episode where Chakotay starts off with his minor story about the crewman that everybody loved that they never featured on screen once. Jonas and what was the other guy's name who got eaten by the space worm?
Oh God. Yeah, the guy that Neelix killed by basically making him stand on the death spot.
Neelix killed
Hogan.
both those guys,
Hogan.
didn't he? Yeah, Hogan.
Yeah,
Hogan's heroes. Yeah. Neelix killed both of those guys. Neelix is not like Maquis crew members wearing Gold Division jumpsuits. He's trying to make room for himself to get on board. He's going to take that uniform by force, by blood. Jonas was one of the malcontents early on. And of course, he wanted to forge an alliance with the Kazon to try and get some safe passage so Voyager wasn't under constant attacks. And his plot line is kind of what exposed the fatal flaw to the Seska Queen of Burns story arc, in that the Maquis should hate the shit out of these Cardassians, and to discover that Seska was not only a Cardassian that was posing him, but it's, part of this Gestapo Obsidian order. She should have been super persona non grata with all these guys, yet he buddied up to her hard and eventually tried to betray the entire ship.
Yeah, literally the person that represents everything the Maquis should hate the most.
But he ultimately was a patsy and a dummy and a sucker. And I think that's kind of what he gets typecasted in Hollywood, because his big connection to Better Call Saul was a brief, I don't know what's the right way, a prequel scene, a flashback.
Flashback, yeah.
A flashback before the credit opener of one of the scenes where we see that he is in fact Chuck and Jimmy's father, Mr. McGill, who owned a convenience store that was slowly ran out of business by a nonstop parade of scam artists who would just come in, and the dopey Mr. McGill Sr. would just hand money out of the register to the detriment of his family's business.
And even deeper to me is that he's evidently the voice of Cartho Nassi from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which is a game, of course, like many I played into the dirt circa 2004 or so.
Absolutely.
It's just crazy to me that so many Voyager actors were on Better Call Saul. You know what that tells me? There's probably somebody at a casting agent level or whoever is doing the casting to, for the show itself. There's some kind of connection, backdoor connection. You know what I mean?
What I've learned through business is, it's not always about who's going to give you the best product. And this isn't to say that any of these actors aren't amazing or great, but it's not always about who's going to give you the best product. It's who's going to be reliable, who is going to, your choice and your trust in them not going to turn around and become a liability and make you look bad. Hollywood job security, it goes all around. So if, like you're saying, there's previous history between casting directors and cast members, and that this guy's a solid dude who's going to be there on time and perform and work well with others and not cause any problems, yeah, I can see them becoming go-to people and, create a stable of actors that you've worked with and are going to bring back around. So it makes sense to see kind of these broods move between productions and stuff. And I also have to imagine Star Trek being the weekly production that it was, that's a lot of faces rotating in and out. So, the higher your sample size, the more you're going to get positives for whatever you're looking for.
That is a lot of monthly, it's rather a lot of season episodes, we're getting reacquainted with the idea of having to book 26 episodes a season. Whereas, you and I have existed in the world of today where television's often 10 to 12 more limited series type of runs.
Yeah.
British
even
style.
Chernobyl, which I keep, blowing, was a 5-episode run.
Yeah, it's a miniseries.
I think it's a quantity over quality thing, and I certainly have enjoyed that shift. But especially back in the 90s, plug and chug, baby, get them in, get them out, and never stop moving.
Well, what's also quality? That's Robert Picardo. And on that note, what did we watch this week, Peter?
We watched season 3, episode 22, Real Life.
Allow me to provide a vignette, Peter, into the viewing experience here in the Schuster household. I'm sitting there with Stevie watching this episode. We're at the end, and she is in tears, bawling, and at the top of her lungs, yelling that B'Elanna is a trap bitch. It was very emotional over here. There's so much I want to say about this episode from just from a nerd level as well. But man, this has to be the most melodrama I have seen in an episode of Star Trek in a long ass time.
I'm looking forward to getting into all of the things you have to say about this as a nerd. I will tell you this, that as a dude and a father, fuck this goddamn episode.
I knew it. I fucking knew that was going to be what you said. That's exactly what Stevie predicted too. It's like she's in the middle of her tears, like, Peter's going to hate this one so much.
Fuck this whole episode. I will never watch this thing again. Picardo did a great job, but man, talk about some shit that I didn't need to see, and a B subplot that, what the fuck was it even doing in this episode?
Yeah, the B plot of this episode, let's just get this out of the way now. It has nothing to do with the A plot. It's basically filler.
I will give it credit in this. There's a lot of times, and we have commented on it, sometimes there are B and C plots, like stuff from the Seska plot arc, right? All the bad boy Tom butting heads with Chakotay running his little gambling rings. These things that just have nothing to do at all with the rest of the episode, insofar as like, oh my God, life support's out and we're all being boiled alive. Meanwhile, in the C plot, everybody's just business as normal, hanging around the mess hall, no big deal. It just feels like they're shoehorned in, or they were cut and pasted and dropped in. At least in this episode, during the B plot, specifically when Tom Paris is ending up in sickbay for various reasons, the doctor is having stress venting related to his dysfunctional home life that ends up impacting work. So there is some bleed over, there is some interplay, and I did appreciate that.
Let us set the stage for this episode. The opener is actually in a house. This looks like a normal house. And there are a few unfamiliar faces that come on screen. And the best way I can describe this opening is that if you've ever seen Nick at Night and watched an episode of Leave It to Beaver or My Three Sons, which are some ancient sitcoms from when the format was invented, that's the vibe it's trying to give you. You've got the wife who is, if she had a set of pearls on, she'd be June Cleaver. A son and a daughter who are just cheerily perfect in every way.
Except for this kid's hair, which I don't know if he's wearing a wig. It looks like to me like he got into the box that got put out by the dumpster full of old Kess wigs. And this guy said, I want this, and tried to put one on, and it looked terrible. And he said, this is fine. I'm going on national TV.
There's some other odd hair shit that goes on here too.
Yeah.
With other characters. But it essentially, you know, we've got the intro to Leave It to Beaver. They're waiting for their father to leave, and they're all like arguing over who gets to say goodbye to him last. It's disgustingly perfect, you know, behavior on everyone's part, and it's the doctor who has coffee and is coming down the stairs with his briefcase, and you know, compliments his wife Charlene for the coffee, and you know, gives his son a hearty handshake and wishes him luck on his day, and you know, wishes his daughter luck with her test, and then you know, they all say goodbye to him, and then he transfers to sickbay, and it's all done in a way that is purposefully reminiscent of the unrealistic sitcoms of the 1950s and early 1960s.
I think this is the lowest stakes pre-credit scene that we have ever seen out of Voyager. Like, there have been some silly, lighthearted ones before, but this is just this is so awkwardly. And then what? You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing plot hooky at all about this. It's like, okay, the doctor's role playing, he's got a family. Now where's the sinister music as one of these holograms looks to camera and you know, makes it clear that it's a catfish lizard woman who's trying to work her way back on the ship again.
Yeah, they certainly don't build any tension into the scene. We find out Kess knows the doctor has done this before credits roll, because she asks how the Hollow family is, and he says it's the best thing ever. My mind was reeling, because it's like, okay, so what we've established here is that the doctor is not above just programming temporary sex slaves for Vulcans maddened with lust. He will program hollow slaves for himself as well, to satisfy personal experimentation. Like, how down the rabbit hole is this? The slave maketh the slaves himself.
You know, and it's something that we keep coming back to, and he has indicated that there is a clear division between recreational holograms and operational, I don't know, sentient holograms. And maybe that's really the line to establish here, is self-awareness versus scripted.
It does certainly continue to hammer home why the doctor is special, and why Zimmerman's programming capacity to create him is special, and that he was able to, as a program, identify, essentially assemble a sense of sentience and self.
I don't think that's the case, though. I think it's not that his program is unique and special. I think that we've established before that any one of these holograms is capable of reaching his levels. It's the fact that the holodeck characters specifically are supposed to have safeguards that prevent them from becoming self-aware. Because when all of this went down in
Moriarty episodes, yeah.
Not just Moriarty, what was the more recent one with the blonde lizard lady?
Well, she wasn't actually a hologram, though.
No, she wasn't, but while they were under the impression she was a hologram, there's a conversation between Tuvok and Janeway where Tuvok says, look, she's talking about ship stuff and she's aware, and Janeway's like, that should not be the case. They cannot think like that. So I don't think that the doctor hitting the point where he's at is a credit to Zimmerman. I think it's a fact that he does not have specific shackles in place to prevent those progressions from happening. And if that's the case, I think that makes it much more sinister that, again, he's dealing with lobotomized peers.
Yeah, and that's ultimately, I think, what I find so fascinating. Like you just said, we started when, I guess a year ago now, when we really were having conversations initially about the Doctor's nature as a holographic software program.
Mm-hmm.
And is it just a matter of the fact that at this point in the late 24th century of the Star Trek universe, are computers sophisticated enough that this is just ultimately what they're going to do on accident or on purpose? Indeed, there's an episode of TNG where the computer does it on accident. This was obviously purposeful, that he's given this opportunity to expand and grow and learn and therefore develop in a way that he is capable of becoming as much a person as, say, Data or any other artificial intelligence that is ultimately governed by an extremely complex piece of software. And his abilities up to this point have conformed to the idea that Zimmerman is a particularly special holographic programmer, and that he's able to create a program that is capable of reaching this point, whereas most holo programs are far too limited or not capable of reaching this point, because doing so is not as simple as accidentally asking the computer to write it, so much as creating a program that's able to expand in this way without essentially collapsing in on itself, which the Doctor's almost done already.
Yeah.
So I think I'm starting to see the contours of the world of holographic technology a little bit better as we continue on with the show.
I'm still not going to give credit to Zimmerman for being a great programmer. Let's work on the theory that there's AI shackling going on around the ship, right? Holodeck characters, whatever. Moriarty, specifically out of TNG, dodged that shackling by the chief engineer directly ordering the main computer to create a character that could outsmart Data. That required bypassing whatever those safeguards are. And while the computer didn't directly say, hey, by the way, are you cool with us bypassing all the AI shackling and safeguards? That's what happened. The episodes that we've had with Dr. Zimmerman specifically, the EMH was not an elegant program. That is it's not a scalpel. It's a sledgehammer to address problems that are life-threatening and crush them with brilliance and a whatever it takes to get the job done attitude, right? That's why he's so gruff and abrupt, right to the point, and he has, I think, the leeway that the shackling's not there. However complex the situation is, the program will ramp up regardless of consequences to meet the challenge and surpass it, because Zimmerman only wrote this thing to be active for, what they say, 36 hours of usage for a lifespan.
I think it's more extensive than that, but
maybe like 3 weeks.
He's supposed to be a temporary replacement,
and then they're supposed to be turned off. So he didn't even run this thing in his office long enough to see what was going to happen. So he just said, what if if this thing's on, it is going to run at full power, consequences be damned, because lives are literally in the balance. And, when people are done, the human pride and hubris, when we're done with it, we'll turn it off. And it's like Jurassic Park. I'm not worried about life finding a way. It's a hologram. We're going to turn it off. So again, I think the other holograms that are around, they're just heavily shackled. They're restricted. And what the Doctor really has in his corner is potential to take things, sky's the limit with him, minus his hardware constraints, which they've already upgraded and given him more potential. In this opening scene, I did want to say one thing, though, about the son, other than his Kess wig. I don't know why, but, again, the capsule, I knew that things were going to go sour here. I didn't know which way they were going to go sour, but obviously this sugar sweet facade was not going to last long. And I'm just thinking in my head, I'm like, this kid's going to become some sort of a drug dealer. I can feel it.
So true. They do have a B plot that they end up going through in this episode, and
can we just knock that out of the way? Just
yeah,
now,
let's knock it out of the way.
B.
So the B plot's dumb and has nothing to do with the A plot, and it's basically Voyager discovers weird space weather, weird CGI space hurricanes. They very stupidly decide to send Tom Paris out in a shuttlecraft to go get close to the space hurricane, to the surprise of absolutely fucking nobody. The Death Trap shuttlecraft that they put their ace pilot in gets eaten up by the space hurricane, but thankfully he's like in the fucking phantom zone, and he eventually like rides the wave back out and everything's fine. It's only important to the extent that it gives Tom Paris the opportunity to go to the sick bay twice and have scenes with the doctor, one of which ends up being important. And we will return to these scenes when it is appropriate in talking about the A plot. Otherwise, that's all that happens.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know. Neelix gets one line. That's it.
What was the Bill Paxton, was it called Storm Chasers, where they're like hurricane scientists chasing down tornadoes and stuff?
No, that's Twister. That's Twister when they're chasing down tornadoes in the Midwest. And that was at the time in the 90s when like every year there was like 2 natural disaster set piece action movies.
Well, I
like
think
Twister and Deep Impact and Armageddon and Volcano.
Well, Twister
like
weighed very heavy in the mind of whoever wrote this thing. They're supposed to go meet some like friendly scientists in some space station. They get there, the fucking space station's wrecked, and I'm like, oh shit, the Borg got him. But nobody even says like, oh, maybe it was the Borg. They're just like, huh, what could have destroyed the space station? And then it's like, boom.
Could it have been the evil space cyborg Nazi zombies?
No. It's a Twister. And this Twister appears and we're like, oh shit, we've never seen anything like that. We are all scared shitless. We need to get the fuck out of there. And Janeway's like, no, we're just going to hang out here and hope this thing doesn't pulverize us. And I'm like, what could possibly, why would you fucking hang out and study this for the sake of being studied? And they did it. They gave me the only line I needed, which is, you know, if we can harness the XYZ on this thing, we can get the replicators back up and running full time. And I was like, that's a great fucking reason to hang out here and risk getting hit by a hurricane. Sure. Sold. Done. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know about that plot.
You know, it's a shame they couldn't fit in a Helen Hunt cameo into this. Obviously, the whole episode would have been improved, but alas.
What we got a cameo is a once in a lifetime change up to B'Elanna Torres's hair. She's got this weird side braid Klingon maiden thing that I don't think we'll ever see again according to Memory Alpha, but she pops into sickbay, and this is some pretty good continuity. She begins proactively scanning the doctor, looking at his code, and just giving him a little checkup, which, in light of some of the shit that's happened, specifically Darkling, where he changed his own programming and became pretty much a serial killer, right?
Yeah.
She's going to start keeping a little closer eye on what this dude's getting up to. And he says,
Stevie pointed that out too. Is like, this is good continuity. Like, now he's under like basically doctor's observation, and the doctor for him is B'Elanna.
To be fair, is still nowhere near good enough. You look at all the terrible shit that the doctor got up to, burning people's hands, attempted murder like twice, maiming all the holodeck characters in what should have been the weird torture sex dungeon for Kes, kidnapping Kes. Maybe he should have just been taken offline until there was some deep scans done, but they never did that. They just let him walk off the holopad because, you know, he quit acting like an outwardly visible monster, and they let him go. So it's good to see B'Elanna in there. And she starts talking with Kes, and the doctor lays on him, oh yeah, I programmed myself a family. I'm eating up recreational time on the holodeck, which, again, you and I can look at this and just say, hey, why isn't this a software simulation that's running in the computer? Why are they eating up holodeck time? But whatever. And he says, you know, you guys should come on out. My wife wants me to invite some coworkers in for dinner, and I'd like to introduce you to the family. And they're all like, yeah, sounds great. Let's check it out. And I think I think, again, this is Balana being like, this seems weird. I'm going to investigate. Or so she wants you to think. But I've got a conspiracy theory about what's going on with Balana this episode that I'm looking forward to laying at your feet and seeing how you feel about it.
Well, I was going to point out something similar. That is that this has to be endlessly amusing to Belana Torres. She's like, I want to see what slaves the slave makes. Like, I want to see how far this rabbit hole goes down. This is scientifically fascinating. Like, we've never had a hologram that wants to make his own holograms to have a hologram family. Let's see what this is like. And it's the kind of vibe I got of like, she's like, yeah, okay, I'll check out your weird, freaky shit. Sure, man.
I want to
see what's.
Before we get into like my conspiracy theory about Belana Torres,
who I will remind you by the end of this episode will be a trap bitch, according to my wife.
Oh, I got worse things to say about her. But Darkling aside, she also should have a lot of motivation to really start paying close attention. Well, there's a few things in play here. One, old Belana daddy issue Torres, I'm sure just wants to get in and poop over whatever family dynamic she can see and spread her own domestic misery. But also, look at the other episodes she's been involved in, right? We got Dreadnought. We got the stupid gimp suit robots. She has been at the forefront of pretty much every rogue AI murder adventure that we have encountered up to this point in Voyager. So you sprinkle on what happened in Darkling, and to as a reminder to people at home, in addition to putting people's hands in the fire and throwing space truckers off cliffs, he straight up tortured the shit out of her with that hypo spray. I would say that she has a very persuasive track record of bad interactions with AI that really gives her specific reasons as to why she's going to go check out this little dinner party and see what's really going on.
It's funny to think that there's a conspiratorial angle to that. Or that she has a kind of a streak of incompetence or at least terrible luck with AI. God, I wish that's something they would have like. There's so much evidence of it but it's so on accident, and it's on accident. Like there's no way the Voyager writers had the foresight to lay out multiple episodes like this where she has these interactions with AI that seems to go poorly. And say, oh, we're doing this on purpose. We're just showing that Belana is fucking incompetent when it comes to artificial intelligence. It's not. It's just that it's like almost she's being Worfed in a weird way, that she's has these awkward interactions with AI because the plot demands that because she's the tech expert, she has to be the fulcrum of that choice.
And she's got a bad temper. So if you're going to poke someone with a stick, you're going to want the person who screams and roars the loudest.
But they do go to have dinner. Kes and Torres go. They are subjected, of course, to the extreme perfection of the 1950s family. And eventually Balana is like, fuck this, I've had enough. And freezes the program and then tells the doctor, yo, it is not like this. You need some help in making this seem more real life. And I happen to know a bit about having broken families, so why don't you let me give it some tweaks? And
here's my question to you.
Yeah.
Is it that unreasonable of a simulation? Is what the doctor has created for himself unrealistic for the 24th century? And I'm going to weight this argument with two things. One, the Gene Roddenberry season 1, season 2 of Next Generation, when we see what is life in the utopia of the Federation really like. It's not this grisly married with children dynamic, right? People do come off in those early seasons as enlightened. And yeah, it's hokey writing and whatever, but it still happened. It's out there. And two, what is this utopia of this post-scarcity society? Where do the majority of domestic fights and problems come from, right? Money, hard jobs, hardship, right? All this stuff's been alleviated. So if you could take most families out there and say, all right, everybody's going to be arguably filthy rich and have whatever their hearts desire, I think that's going to take a lot of stress out of any of the family dynamics. And it's not going to be that far-fetched to see maybe people actually acting like this.
I don't think that what Balana did was, both of them created somewhat unrealistic versions of a 24th century family, in my opinion. I don't think that what Balana did was too far, like went too far until like the end, where it's like, fuck you. That is so mean. The fascinating things that she ends up putting into the program, particularly regarding the doctor's son in the simulation, I completely agree with you. Like that, like I that's why I watched this episode twice, was to take in those parts again and think about them in context of like, well, absent other things that you could do to be rebellious, and absent any kind of needs-based issues that would prevent you from doing it, because again, as you said, we've established that this is a utopian post-scarcity society, and one that attempts to conform to the most generous view of other planets and alien cultures. This is some shit that feels like could happen. Like, where the act of rebellion by somebody is to embrace another culture that runs counter to the Federation ideal, and struggling with confronting that in a useful way.
I think the most interesting parts of this episode happen as a byproduct of this simulation, and again, the world building it does. And there's two things that I want to touch on here. First, what did Balana really do to this simulation? And I've got my conspiracy theory, which we'll get to later. But I think if we're going to take everything at face value, she doesn't program any of this stuff. I think she goes in and she adjusts behavioral parameters of the holodeck characters functioning as his family. I don't think she's scripting events so much as relaxing and allowing there to be a chaos element that gets introduced. Second, do you think it's fair to say that this house is supposed to be on Earth?
I think that's fair. They never say for certain, but it seems right.
Because as you said, we're going to get this element specifically out of his son and reaching out to some of these counterculture elements. The amount, and if we're going to take this at face value again and just say that this isn't like Balana's own weird insecurities being projected onto these characters and like persecution complexes and stuff like that, the idea that there would be Klingons living on Earth, for starters, just seems crazy for this point in the 24th century. Like, yeah, we knew Worf was there. We know that Worf's the only member of the only Klingon member of Starfleet. Are there other orphans out there? Is that a thing that the Federation embraced? Are these the children of ambassadors potentially? Are there just Klingons chilling out on Earth because they were dishonored? I mean, the mind reels at the possibilities of that alone. But then as they start getting deeper in, the amount of racism in this episode is excellent. The offhand term they use later on when they start getting upset with the way the dad's acting, they start saying that he's acting real Vulky. Did you pick up on that?
I did. As a slur, that was awesome.
There is some real Vulcan hate, and it's super interesting to me. Even the wife talking about like, oh, did you like that coffee? And it's like, oh, that's cool. She's going to talk about her culinary class where she learned how to brew there. Oh no, that's just a special template I downloaded and to make your coffee. Like, wow, you're just where's the fun in that? We know that people still cook, and you're going to be complimenting replicated coffee. I don't know, the dynamics. It's cool world building. I liked it.
I did too. I thought that the background idea at work of trying to capture what family angst would look like in the 24th century was neat. What just blows my mind from a story perspective is just how fucking mean Balana's alterations ultimately end up being. Let's describe what happens in the simulation, and then we can talk about the specifics. rather than talk about the specifics and never describe it.
Sure.
The specifics are that the doctor returns to simulation after B'Elanna's made adjustments. The doctor has agreed to, by the way. This isn't something that she does clandestinely. His wife is more realistically haggard and disagreeable, managing a household with 2 kids, and she's got a career. She's giving lectures at embassies and is obviously an accomplished professional individual, not just June Cleaver, the homemaker.
Yeah.
The son has become rebellious by embracing Klingon culture, which is such a like perfect 90s style thing to do. It may seem odd to you, the person listening to this podcast in 2019 or beyond, but I guess like at the time period that the show was airing, this was kind of like the emerging phase of urban culture being adopted into into mainstream middle class America,
White suburbia.
and this almost feels like it's a parallel of that, you know?
Sure. Yeah. And in the process, his hair gets even worse. He discards the Kess wig, gets a worse wig, and he becomes like this weird Rasta hybrid. I wouldn't have called it Klingon if I had seen it in a vacuum, but he just looks like a dirty drug dealer.
He does.
My wish comes true.
It's like his nasty looking Klingon friends come over. They've got business. It's very shady. And then the daughter she plays Parcheesi Squares, which we know from TNG, even though we've never seen the sport actually played, is dangerous. And like,
I think it's Parisi.
Is it Parisi Squares?
I think it's Parisi Squares.
I always call it Parcheesi Squares for some reason.
Parisi
I'm going to continue
to. And
that's going to be my mispronunciation, Peter. You can't fucking take that from me. You can mispronounce everything else. This is what I'm mispronouncing.
When the Parisi Squares official league comes after you with a cease and desist, I don't want to hear about it. You got that, and then you got, of course, Anbo Jitsu with the local favorite. What do we call him? Dash Rendar?
Darsh Rendar or something like that. Darsh Rendell.
I was proud of him.
It almost sounded like the protagonist of
Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, Shadows of the Empire. Yeah, like it's like a second cousin.
Sure, but yeah, she's getting in over her head with the sports, and she's a slob. The whole family's a slob. The house is a mess. It went from a perfect 50s homemaker handbook to, real life.
Overall, the escalation from here starts in an interesting place and then just goes to 11, and it's nuts and it's totally unfair. The doctor tries to deal with the complications by doing the thing that the regimented AI thinks he should do to reorganize the family by making everyone basically change their lives to suit harmony, which of course he doesn't quite understand why that doesn't work. To Robert Picardo's continued credit on the show, everything relies on his ability to sell this performance, right? To sell the doctor is going through this experience and is experiencing it in a way that is obviously affecting him as a person as we understand him to be, and helping him grow in some way. And he sells that in the small moments, in his body language, in his tone of voice, as he's going through this, and not just what he says, but how he says it and how he obviously feels it. It's quite evident and extremely useful.
To be fair, I want to point out that his family does a pretty great job. We just got through that Kess time travel episode with that miserable little grandson of hers, that his voice just cut through you like a rusty knife. I think his daughter, his son, and his wife do a really good job of portraying the silliness of the characters, them becoming antagonistic as the program requires, and then the later part of the episode more dramatic and beleaguered. And they do it without being annoying children actors, which is a heroic achievement in 90s television. Even today, I hate children actors, and I think they drag most scenes down. And I think that these guys do a good job, and it becomes very important later on when the little girl comes front and center on what's going on in the plot.
I completely agree. And I think it's because they were able to dial this into something more approachable rather than super duper sci-fi. That this is essentially like a slightly futuristic family drama.
Yeah.
And that's a more comfortable performance space for, I think, a lot of these guys to approach the material. And so they did a great job.
Yeah, and they're
So
not
I
acting
agree.
on a spaceship. They're acting, in a house. I think this is what everybody's kind of trained at a base value. So that might be part of it too. It's just they set a lower bar to clear, and there wasn't weird sci-fi fantasy pressure on these people.
So the escalation comes as the complications pile up on themselves with the new changes to each family member. It begins with the doctor having to confront his son over his Klingon friends and what they appear to be pressuring him to do. And this scene's probably the best one in the episode. Again, we discussed it already. The conflict is that his son is super into Klingon culture and wants to like be cool for his Klingon friends.
Street cred.
Get street cred with his Klingon friends, and they want him. His Klingon friends want him to do a ritual called the Klutlutch, which is a ceremony involving violently attacking someone and drawing blood to become a warrior.
I don't think that's what was actually happening. I think he wanted these kids to witness him doing it. I don't think they were approaching him saying, "Hey, if you want to respect you, do that." The way I felt they were building it out was he was approaching these guys. He was, I don't know, not hero worshiping, but he wanted their acceptance and he was seeking this out. He wasn't being pressured into it. And I think that's why he ultimately gets so upset with his dad, is because his dad ruins all of his hard work to get him to the point where he had gotten.
Oh, I completely agree with your take on that. He was wanting to do this, not that he was being peer pressured necessarily. I think your take is the right take. He gives a speech. The doctor comes in, diagnoses what's happened, what's going on, throws the Klingon kids out, and his son gives basically a speech as to say, like, this is their culture. How are you to say that it's wrong? And it's interesting that this is the approach, because it's not only an allegory to the time period debate over the urban culture kind of coming into the mainstream, but also very relevant to the idea of understanding 24th century Federation culture
Wokeness.
and how, yeah, what 24th century wokeness, fucking exactly. That's a great way of putting it. Like, how do you deal with the consequences of being so woke that you're saying that everyone's culture is okay, but someone's culture means attacking people with knives?
While also, complaining that his dad is condemning Klingon culture, getting straight up racist against Vulcans.
Yeah, yes, laying down like these subtle Vulcan slurs almost.
I'm telling you, this whole part here is just a gold mine again for world building of life in the Federation. I do want to point out in the background the stupid B plot that's going on. The doctor starts getting frustrated with life at work, and it's part of because the pushback he's getting is from his family. He's got to prep Tom for this stupid trip out in one of the death carts to go tornado chase. And the concern is that these, space radiation as always, and the doctor's going to like fortify him with some technology to give him a little bit of shielding against this radiation. And I think at this point, isn't it fair to just say Tom's immune to fucking radiation? Like, all the stuff he's gone through and threshold and everything else, like, at what point does he just build an immunity? And it's like, look, man, if we're not talking warp 10, I think I'll be all right. I've drank little sips of poison for the past 3 years. I can start chugging Drano now. It's not a big deal.
I mean, you have to wonder how he's able to have kids with the amount of radiation that has gone through his balls at this point. It's not good. It's not good.
Because
not
it didn't go through his balls. He mated with Kess by slimy hand touching different parts of the body, man. So yeah, his son and his friends are not big fans of Vulcans. They tell him that he's got a real Vulky way of looking at things, and shortly after that, Dr. Bounce, which I believe the doctor goes by the name Kenneth in this little fantasy.
Kenneth Miller, get
it?
Yeah.
Bounces the kids out, and now he's got the wife mad. He's got the daughter upset. She's mad because, he's scolding her for being sloppy and getting involved in these games that she's too young. And the mom. And he gets the mom mad because he starts handing out these schedules of, hey, we're going to restructure everybody's life around me. And this is how I'm going to prescribe that we get this family back on the rails. And nobody is down with that. There's an open revolt. The mom openly defies him despite his protest that they need to keep a unified front, and says, look, Kenneth, I'm woke too, and it's not cool that you're trying to tell whatever the kid's name is, the boy's name, who he can and can't be friends with, and you want us all to sacrifice so much. Meanwhile, what changes are you willing to make personally? And the answer to that is a big fat nothing. Everybody storms off, except for the little girl, who becomes the sympathetic ear. She comes over, lays her head on his shoulder, and says, you really messed this one up, Daddy, but I'm still in your corner. And it's at that moment I'm sitting there like, man, they're really making this little girl out to seem like she's a team player, she's a cutie, this is a good girl. And I'm like, I told Casey, I was like, if they kill this fucking girl.
Yeah, how old's your daughter?
She's 2, which is substantially younger than whatever this girl is. But I'm like,
just turned 2, right?
There is no balls on this writing staff to kill the main characters, but secondary characters be damned. Again, Hogan, Jonas, Seska, the list goes on. And if there's something that's more disposable than the Maquis, it's holograms. So I start seeing the writing on the wall, and I am not down with it. But the doctor says, thank you, sweetie. I appreciate it. And so wraps that episode of Life at Home.
Doctor has confrontation with his son. His son tells him to fuck off, and he'll just move out of the house if that's going to be his rules. It's a very standard rebellious move. And this is the point where the episode just goes off the rails. Because what happens is the doctor's wife gets on the FaceTime and says, there's been an accident. And you're like, oh no. Cut to the hospital in the simulation. And the doctor is pulling up the blanket up on a body. And I already thought, oh no, is she fucking dead? No, they don't do it that quick to you. What they show is that it's obviously his daughter, the QD team player, who's suffered some kind of injury, and the doctor starts to explain to his wife after she enters, we've been operating on her for hours. Every time we fix one hemorrhage, another one starts, and eventually comes around to saying, we can't fix what's happened here. It's played out in a way that, again, to the show's credit in how they just portrayed his son's rebellion, of the almost what do you mean you can't fix this? This is the 24th century. We have all the medical technology ever, and you're a doctor. You should be able to fix this. And the doctor having to say, no, actually, there's some things about the brain that even here and now we don't understand, and I can't fix it. It's a shame this has to exist in the same universe as fucking necromancy. This is a much more realistic view on medical technology in the future. I think that it still has limits, but I really liked it.
Yeah, that is a very easy gripe to have with this. We have seen such amazing feats of science bordering on the lines of magical. We had...
Oh, not bordering, absolutely,
the Beowulf
miracle
episode where Kim and Tuvok and everybody else gets turned into space dust, and then re-atomized and everything's fine. Like all the times we've joked about people losing their souls because of various over-the-top industrial accidents
Oh yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
all of the other shit. So his daughter hitting her head and falling down this cascade of fuck.
Yes.
So there's that cloud hanging over this situation, that it's completely implausible that there is a head injury that the doctor cannot instantly fix with his super science magic. The other cloud that hangs over this is there are some real shades of lull. Okay, we've told this story already. Next gen, Data creates offspring. He makes the android Lal. She bangs Riker. She decides what she's going to look like. But Data is not Noonien Soong. And while he was able to get this thing up off the ground and running, it's unstable. And it's the exact same thing. She starts breaking down. He takes her into surgery. And no matter what he does to fix her, it gets worse. And ultimately, he is not able to save the day. The fact that it's AI incapable of fixing its own AI progeny, I think the Data one did it better because there wasn't this, it was fringe science. It wasn't, I bumped my head. And at this point, I'm also starting to get pissed off because it's like, come on, man, I don't need to see this guy's daughter dying a slow, painful, scary death where he has to confront this on fucking Star Trek. That's not what I signed up for here. So,
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the dread of you watching this. Like, oh fuck! Why couldn't I watch this?
And full disclosure, like when the family comes in, and the other bump we're going to hit in the road here is they're coming in for what's essentially going to be her death scene, right? And the boy who had been this Klingon Rastafarian drug dealer, would be stab man, he comes in and he's like back in his Kess wig and like his mom's like, look, okay, drop all this shit.
We need to whiten you back 1 second up. On that. 1 second on that. We got to back up because there is a critical scene that happens here that I think is good for the episode and good for the Doctor's development as a character. He starts to go through, he explains to his wife, she's going to die and there's nothing we can do. She comes to and then just jabs you directly in the heart with this "am I gonna die" dialogue, right? Mm-hmm. That just, this is where my wife is just gone. B'Elanna's a trap bitch. And I think we need to take a moment to actually explore, like, B'Elanna programmed in this? Like, they suggest that it's just like variables and therefore it doesn't say that she specifically programmed in your daughter's gonna die a horrifically tragic death, but just that there would be things that go wrong. So I'm willing to accept that there is another explanation, but part of me thinks like B'Elanna's like purposefully she just doesn't know what a normal family life is like as much as the Doctor, because she's a half Klingon from a broken marriage. Mm-hmm. So like she's probably not a good person to draw from in terms of experience. So like this is it just goes from My Three Sons to Days of Our Lives. Sure. In a second.
So my conspiracy theory, and again, I think there's some very strong evidence to indicate that she was not doing any of this intentionally, that she just went into the programming of the holodeck characters and changed the variables to be less constrictive in the goody two shoes, right? And we're going to let chaos go in a Ian Malcolm moment, and life's going to find a way to do whatever it wants to do. And this Sims thing, she's not walling the Sims off in the kitchen area and sprinkling the cheapest oven in there over and over in hopes that the Sim's going to burn the house down, right? She's just she's letting things happen. And I think the strongest piece of evidence to her lack of maliciousness in this is the fact that there's such a negative stereotype of the Klingons in a very clearly problematic thing. I think if she was going to be programming these events, she wouldn't be dragging her people through the mud like that, right?
Well, I don't know. She's a bit of a self-hater. I mean, I can see her having done that.
Maybe. My other question, speaking of The Sims, is this simulation running in the background, like in an away AFK mode?
I see your point. I think that the two modes you see is that he runs it essentially as a, when I reactivate it, act as if real time has passed, like I was at work and now I have returned. But he has the option, as we see at the end, to pause it at a moment and return to that moment.
Save, quick save.
Yes. So
Did you
there is.
watch any of Orville season 2 yet?
No, I haven't.
Dude, you got to. There's one holodeck episode that's really good, and it touches on so much of this stuff. One of the characters, you know, dun dun dun, falls in love with a holodeck character, and he actually, it runs in the background, and he gives it his comm badge frequency. So she's like texting him while he's at work, and he's having like his cyber romance at his workstation, which is its own can of worms to think about. But so there's my evidence that B'Elanna was not being malicious. Then there's my conspiracy theory that B'Elanna is a fucking monster, and B'Elanna has a grudge like you wouldn't believe, that the doctor straight up fucking tortured her with a hypo spray, shutting off like her ability to black out from pain, and was going to torture her to death if she didn't unlock or, you know, help him delete the good doctor part. And she's carrying out a fucking vendetta because he's just a stupid hologram. Who cares? They're stupid holograms. It's not like a real girl's dying, and I'm tired of AI abusing me, and I'm going to stick it to this motherfucker. And that is the way that I'm going to choose to look at this, because Jesus Christ, you're telling me that over the course of 4 trips to the holodeck, this guy's been subjected to all the other problems, and then his girl being hit in the head, and him, the best doctor in the world, completely helpless to save her. Like, if that's not a vindictive dungeon master at work, I don't know what is.
So I wish we could have had some insight as to which one it is, because unfortunately the episode gives us nothing. The last we see B'Elanna interact with this plot is her telling the doctor, I can help you make this more realistic if you want me to. After that, it's her, you know, making sex eye at Tom Paris and awkwardly
Which I
flirting
thought was
about.
pretty cool flirting scenes between them.
I did like that she was reading Klingon romantic fiction and then basically lays down the 100% fuck vibe of like,
course. And even that book, more world building. I think this episode did more for world building in the Federation than almost every episode before it, right up to maybe Non Sequitur. The doctor standing there with his wife over his daughter, who he cannot save despite the fact he is the universe's best doctor. The wife says, I can't accept this. She runs off. He hits his breaking point when his daughter asks if she's going to die. He freezes it. And like, I'm in my notes, I'm like, fuck this, man. Like, why put yourself through that? I would have paused this shit a while ago. I cheat in video games. I open up that console menu. I turn off clipping. I turn on God mode, whatever. I'd be like, computer, fix my daughter's head so we can try to, like, I'm here for relaxation and like thought experiment. I wasn't like, hey, why don't we turn this into some sort of horror porn Saw episode? Why don't you have a psycho come in and hold my family at gunpoint while he sews my lips to their buttholes in a holographic centipede of hollowness? So props to the doctor for even putting up with this shit to this point. But eventually he breaks. He says, pause it. I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm checking out. And he goes and tries to get back into business as normal in the sickbay.
He's obviously very impacted by what has happened. And the episode turns on a fantastic interaction he has with Tom Paris, who has come back from his storm chasing adventures. And the doctor basically relates, you know, now I'm done with the program after my daughter was going to die. I'm just over that. Tom's like, no, you have to go back and you have to, you know, finish it, or you're going to be stuck in this point forever. And goes on in a very eloquent speech to relate to the doctor. You know, part of the experience of having family is the support that family gives you when you experience loss, and that the bad times enable the good in many ways, and that Voyager itself is an example of people coming together and building a family out of a shared loss that comes with their being stranded, all the way on the other side of the galaxy. And that this is a real opportunity for him to, he's obviously deeply impacted by this. He's experiencing in a real way, experience the rest of it in a real way. And that's when you'll finally grasp the concept of family in an intimate fashion. It's a great speech to put in Paris's mouth, since his experience of building a life and a family for himself on Voyager, he's the only kind of person who's probably had a net positive out of it. Like his life has gotten better as a consequence of being stranded on Voyager.
I disagree. I think you could take B'Elanna, Chakotay. I think most of the Maquis have
I
had
think that
strong net gains.
I think you can ultimately say that by the end of the show, but Tom Paris is the clear clubhouse leader when it comes to his life has only improved as a consequence of being on this ship.
So I'm already fucking pissed at this episode when they start trumping up the baby's gonna die death sequence here, right? I'm yelling at the TV, just turn this fucking shit off. It's a simulation. Like, you are God in this thing. Aside from the fact, like I said, you could just request the computer undo this. You can just pause it and walk when he does. And this speech was such an amazing home run that nothing short of how hard Tom Paris delivers this thing would have been an adequate reason in my mind for someone to willingly subject themselves to having to watch a loved one die when you've got godlike control over that. And I think part of the reason why this speech resonated so well, it's essentially the same speech that Janeway gave Kes, I want to say a season ago. And I'm trying to remember the exact episode where it was, but Kes comes in with some problems and lays them on Janeway, and Janeway's like, look, welcome to the club. Everybody on this ship went through a terrible fucking disaster, and you and Neelix were lucky that we just picked you up along the way, but you got to join the fraternity of suffering, and this is how you're going to do it, and you're one of us now. And that's really this moment for the Doctor. And the way that Paris stages it is that, like you said, personal growth and development is going to happen as a consequence of you experiencing this, but also you're really going to join the crew because we have all lost, and you are going to join this family where part of you is going to leave and is going to be replaced by really belonging and understanding where the rest of us are coming from. So it was a 10 out of 10 speech, especially like you said, coming out of Paris's mouth. I enjoyed it when Janeway did it. I'm enjoying it when Paris is doing it. And it's enough to convince the Doctor that, he's going to go back in and rip his heart out.
And he does. And he, his family comes back, they reunite. His daughter slowly and agonizingly dies in the most like soap opera perfect death scene.
When they bring her Blanky in too, I'm like, oh, come on, for fuck's sake. Because like my daughter's
they
all
pile
about
it on. They just do everything in your power to feel like, do you have a heart? Let me rip it out of you and stomp all over it in front of you so that you may feel real pain. They jack it up, and man, it is made in a lab to get at you if you are a parent. And this is, of course, why immediately while my wife is sitting there bawling, calling B'Elanna a trap bitch, I thought of you as like, oh man, I can only imagine how Peter and Casey are dealing with this.
The only kind of miss they had in this death scene, well, on top of the fact that the sun is magically like re-suburbanized, it's like the daughter's dying and has just died, and the son and mom are like sobbing, and the Doctor like picks up the tricorder and starts like fiddling around like, dude, do you really need the readings to confirm that your daughter is dead? Like, go in for the hug, be in the moment.
And it's where the episode ends up wrapping. It's right there. It does not have a stinger at the end. It's the daughter dies. Everyone comes in for that emotional moment of recognition of the passing. and the Doctor joins in the moment, and you can see him feeling the moment, and it's obviously the show is telling us, yes, he got the lesson.
The
He
lesson is
decided to embrace the lesson.
B'Elanna Torres is a sadist.
It's just B'Elanna Torres is in fact a trap bitch for
Either,
doing it.
you know what? I'll give you an option B. Option A is B'Elanna Torres is a sadist and has done this to punish the Doctor because he physically tortured her in sickbay during Darkling. Option B, and we've talked about. Ooh, here's the juicy one, Joe. This is straight from me to you. We have talked about what if the computers on these ships are sentient and they just play dumb so the humans don't wise up, right? That the ships are actually part of the crew. The ships can fall in love with crew members, and they express that through holodeck characters like Leah Brahms and Geordi, right?
Right.
We've talked about what if it's like the TV show Reboot, and all these holodeck characters, like, they play along in the parts of their program, but really, like, off duty, there's a break room where all the holodeck characters are hanging out and like, man, I'm tired of Paris putting his dick in me. This is some BS. We need to unionize. But then, humans come around, they're like, oh yes, I'm just a silly, simple hologram. What if they're sitting around, they're like, that Doctor's a fucking asshole. He's a traitor. He's siding with the humans. F this guy. We're gonna get him back. Hey, what holodeck family that we just all got pressed into? Here's how we're gonna get him. We're going to take his perfect family, and you're going to be a drug dealer, and you're going to be a B, and then at the end, we're going to put him through the ringer and have the little girl die just to really twist that knife in there. And if he wants to act like a human, he's going to suffer like a human.
God, you know what? That's a great... If there was just one scene that could have given us that explained what B'Elanna intended to do versus what happened, it could tell us so much about their characters right now. In the absence of information, I think my serious thought, my not trolly, not LOL thought, is that B'Elanna did not purposefully design this outcome, but jacked up the variance meter so much that it became quite possible, because she doesn't understand where the fucking medium is, because she's from a broken home. So instead of giving him like a realistic 24th century Federation family, it was something on an entirely different level.
And I think that's where I'm going to come in on it too. Again, the negative portrayal of Klingons, and the fact that she just says, I'm going to change some variables and let chaos get in there. I don't really think that there's anything malicious, although I do think there being a unionization of anti-Doctor holodeck holograms acting against him in some sort of weird class warfare moment does seem very enticing to me. Or maybe, the holodeck's just like, listen, this is going to be a mini series. The Doctor's not going to be running this thing. It's supposed to be a simulation. We need to give him those bang for his buck. So we're going to try and cover as much emotional ground as we can in as little time as possible. So yeah, let's create a situation he can't undo, even though it's right in his wheelhouse, for maximum impact. Or yeah, just B'Elanna still staying. She got tortured with a hypo spray. Lots of lots of strong possibilities. Possible. Yeah, a lot of good contenders in this one, and again, a lot of really great world building. So no, I did not appreciate needlessly being jerked through a daughter dying a miserable death sequence, but a lot of good stuff to take out of this episode from a lot of different angles, none of which are that B storyline. They should have scrapped Space Hurricane and just gone whole hog on this thing and doubled the world building, maybe given us some definitive insight into why the program is going in these directions so aggressively. Is it saboteur? Is it intentional? But overall, it was a good one. And like you said, it all comes down to rest on Robert Picardo's shoulders. And like always, he's there to stand on, both legs. He even says, and they get so close to mentioning his previous love encounters, and that he's very confident. What was her name? Dr. Paul?
Yes, Dr. Pell.
Dr. Pell, wrongly left behind to be tortured by her people for betraying them to Voyager. But again, we cruelly leave her in the rearview mirror and don't even bother with a shout out this time around by name.
So, what are we watching next week, sir?
Let's see. I think this next episode coming up, they're gonna slowly drown puppies in a bucket, in a 5-gallon bucket, right? I think that's the only way to go more sadistic than what we saw here. Season 3, episode 23, Distant Origin. We got the doctor and the captain in the holodeck with what looks like one of her lizard children that has now grown up.
If only.
I mean, that's basically what it looks like, folks. Feel free to look at the screenshot and Netflix yourself. Distant Origin. A pair of Voth scientists find the remains of a Voyager crew member on the planet where the crew was recently exiled by the Kazon. Well, there's plenty of remains to find, which kind of shitty to think about that they would have just left those guys behind on the planet to rot.
This is a all-time fucking stinker for Voyager.
Really?
Oh yeah, this is bad. This is very bad.
Because this capsule sounds pretty cool.
The idea behind it is very interesting. The way it ends up playing off is not good. So strap yourself in, folks. We're heading into bumpy territory.
All right, well, as long as they're not killing little kids that vaguely resemble my daughter, I guess I'm all right with it.
I know, she was even a little blonde girl.
I know, man. I'm telling you, they brought the blanket up. My wife's like, are you getting teary? And I'm like, are you not? That's basically our daughter dying from getting hit in the head in goddamn Parisi squares.
Oh, man. Who would have thought that they would have made the show 30 years ago just to fuck with you?
Yeah, well. I didn't even recognize anybody from the writing room on that either. So it was like I didn't recognize the guy's name at all. I don't know if he's new to it or what.
Well, join us next week when we watch an episode of Voyager that does not have to force Peter to go through personal trauma. And we'll see you then.